Dr. Jensen, you've spoken a little bit about the importance of data. How should we leverage our unique U.S. government data sets to our advantage?
Thank you, Senator. First, make them actually interoperable. One of the big challenges we have is that because of just antiquated bureaucratic procedures and stovepiping, this AI scientist would probably not be that successful in the US government because he couldn't make any of the data. It's not that it's just heterogeneous, it's spread out over bureaucracies with random officials, each exerting authority they don't have to limit the ability to share. So if you need more data to make smarter models and you have people limiting the exchange of data, you're never going to, again, the train's not going to leave the station. So I think the first thing, and this is where I think Congress has a very important role, is how do you actually, whether it's through testimony, whether it's through the NDA, whether it's through hearings like this, how do you get bureaucrats to be accountable to actually exchange the data? And it actually goes deeper into actually government procurement and contracting. Right now, we could insert basic blanket language that would require all vendors, because the sensors, the intelligence community, we buy it. Right? So why shouldn't it be that they're required to produce the information in standardized formats that we could ensure are interoperable? So we lower the actually bureaucratic and engineering friction, and we can make use of it. It's just a boring issue, so sadly people don't pay attention to it.
But it's probably the most foundational issue from...
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Ding, you talked a lot about diffusion capacity. Are there any things that you consider threats to our diffusion capacity that we should be concerned with?
Yeah, I would say the main things to improve in terms of the U.S.'s diffusion capacity is investing more in the STEM workforce in terms of not just attracting or building up the best and the brightest, but widening the base of average engineers in software engineering or artificial intelligence. The U.S. government has some proposals on that, and the CHIPS and Science Act made some steps in that direction, but I would say we have overly weighted towards investing in R&D as sort of like the end-all be-all of science and technology policy, and a more diffusion-oriented policy would look at things like broadening the workforce, investing in applied technology services, centers and dedicated field services. There's different voucher schemes that can encourage the adoption of AI techniques by small businesses as well. So all of those things would help resolve some gaps in our diffusion capacity.
Very helpful. Dr. Jensen, the current DoD directive governing lethal autonomous weapon systems appears, from my read, to permit the potential development, even deployment of fully autonomous systems, not just in the defensive, that can select and engage targets, that could select or engage targets without a human in the loop. Talk to me about what are the risks there, how we should be further developing that policy, especially with regard to potential escalation.
Sure. Great question, Senator. I think the real issue here is not whether or not you should do it. It's here, right? It's how, again, you get the assurance in the model and why you have to constantly train and experiment to understand those edge cases, which I think is where also Senator Rubio is getting. Where is there that moment of high escalation risk that's actually irrational in the grand scheme of things, but it makes perfect statistical sense at the moment? You won't find those weird cases until you do large-scale wargaming and constant experimentation. And that's not just fine-tuning the model. This is where I think we get it wrong. We think it's like, well, I'm just going to calibrate the model. I'm going to fine-tune the model. No, it's fine-tuning the men and women who will use the model to make some of the most difficult decisions about taking life. Because eventually, there's still someone flipping that switch, right? And so we need to make sure that those people, those men and women in uniform, and the elected officials granting them the ability to use lethal force, have actually done tabletop exercises and experiments where they've thought through this. Don't let your first moment of unleashing your robotic swarm be the first time you thought about it. And that's going to require a larger national security dialogue and even, tabletop exercises that help them see those moments.
Dr. LeCun, last question. Before systems get released into the wild, as it were, there are a lot of ethical and other questions that need to be asked. Do you think that Meta's AI and trust safety team, or for that matter, the team for any AI developer, have the capability to really understand what the potential risks and benefits are before, to be able to know whether or not making a system, putting it into the wild or making it open is a good idea.
Senator, thank you for your question. I can describe the process that we went through for the Llama and Llama 2 system. So first of all, the Llama system was not made open source. There's two parts to an open source package. There is the code, and the code, frankly, is very simple and not particularly innovative. What is interesting for the community to release is the train model, the weights. This is what's expensive. This is what only large companies can do at the moment. And we released it in a way that did not authorize commercial use. We kind of vetted the people who could download the model. It was reserved for researchers and academics. This was a way for us to test what the system could be used for. Of course, there was a long history of 3 years of open source LLMs that were available before, and the harm had not materialized so far. So there was a history we could base ourselves on. For Llama 2, we had a very thorough process. First, the data set was curated in such a way that the most sort of controversial toxic content was eliminated from it so that we would get a high quality model. Second, there was a lot of red teaming, and so people would basically try to break the system and get it to produce dangerous or toxic content. Thousands of hours were spent doing this by a group that is independent from the group that actually designed and trained the system. We have an entire group called Responsible AI, whose responsibility, among others, is to do this kind of thing. And then we distributed in a limited way the model to white hat hackers at the DEF CON conference, for example. So a slightly bigger community of people who are really expert at trying to kind of break systems of this type. And got some assurance that those systems were good. We fine-tuned them so that whatever was bad was fixed. And then we instituted a bug bounty policy so that there would be an incentive for people who find weaknesses in our system to tell us. And in fact, the enthusiasm from the open source community after the release of Llama 2 has been so enormous, that